행사장 내외에 계신 여러분께 잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 본 행사는 아시다시피 유튜브로 생중계되고 우리말, 영어, 프랑스어로 생중계될 예정입니다. 통역기가 필요하신 분들은 입구에서 수령하시면 되겠고요. 채널 1번은
If you need a receiver for the
한국어, 2번
translation,
영어, 3번
please switch to
프랑스어로
channel 1 for
통역해
Korean,
주시면
channel
되겠습니다.
2 for English, and channel 3 for
더불어서
French.
지금 국회 사랑제에서 사전 환담이 진행 중인데
We also
조금
have a
지연이
reception
된다는
that is
소식이 좀
taking
들어온 것
place in the
같습니다.
Sarangje.
주최
And
본토론을
I hear
주최하신
that
조승열
they are
의원님이
slightly
도착하시는 대로
behind
사전 환담
schedule.
끝나고
So we will begin
도착하시는
as
대로
soon as
진행을
the
하도록
guests
하겠습니다.
arrive from
조금
the
지연될 수 있다는 점
reception.
여러분의 양해 바랍니다.
Thank you. 참석해주신 내외빈 여러분께 다시 한번 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. We have
잠시
another
후에 토론회를
announcement to
시작하도록
make. We will
하겠습니다.
soon begin
이제
the
사전 환담을
conference.
마치고 주요 내빈들이
The
또
reception
쭉
is
도착하고
over
계신데요.
and our guests
자리를 좀
are
정돈할
arriving.
시간을 한 2분, 3분 정도만
I will give
가질까요?
you 2 to 3 minutes
원래 10시
to
시작
take your
예정인데
seats.
조금
So
지연된다는
although you
점
were
여러분의
supposed to start at
배량을 다시
10
한번
a.m.,
부탁드리고요.
we may be slightly
잠시 후에
behind schedule.
사랑자에서 사전 환담 마치는 내 외빈께서 자리하신
So as
후에
soon as our
본격적으로
guests take their seats,
토론회를
we
시작하도록
will
하겠습니다.
start
더불어서
the discussion.
통역기를 입구에서 수령하셨을 텐데요.
Also,
1번 채널은
If
한국어,
you have picked up
2번은
your receiver
영어,
from the
3번은
reception desk,
프랑스어로 참고하시면 되겠습니다.
you can switch to channel 1 for Korean, channel 2 for
지금 내 외빈
English, and channel
여러분께서
3
쭉
for
도착하고
French.
계신데요.
So our guests are arriving.
앞쪽에 주요 내 외빈 분들의 자리가 있습니다.
We have the
참고해서
VIP seats up
자리해
front.
주시고 참석해주신 내외빈 여러분께서는 이제 자리를 좀 정돈해 주시기
And we would
바랍니다.
also like
잠시
to ask all
후에
the other
토론회를
participants to please take your
시작하겠습니다.
seats.
더불어서
We will soon
오늘
begin.
토론회는 모든 시간 동안 상시 마스크를
I
착용하는
also would
것
like to
꼭
ask
잊지
everyone to
말아주시기
please
바랍니다.
remember to wear your masks at all times during the event. Thank you.
네, 참석해주신 내외빈 여러분께 다시 한번 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 전 세계 유튜브로
Once
생중계되는
again,
만큼
this event is being
시간을
streamed live
최대한
on YouTube.
준수하려고 합니다.
As such, we're
여러분께서
trying to keep a
착석을
tight
해주시고
schedule, so please take
조금
your
이제 자리를
seats.
정돈해 주신 대로 바로
And as
시작하도록
soon as you
하겠습니다.
are seated, we will begin right away.
다시 한번 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 행사장 내외에 계신 분들은
Once
이제
again,
자리를 좀 정돈해 주시고
Please take your seats.
원활한 행사 진행을 위해서 휴대전화는 매너 모드 혹은
Please
무음으로
also
바꾸는
turn
것
your
잊지
phones
말아
off to
주십시오.
vibrate or turn them off for the event.
네, 속히 진행을 위해서 자리 정돈 다시 한번 부탁
Once
말씀드리고요.
again, I'd like to ask everybody to please take your seats so that we may
잠시
begin.
후에 자리가 정돈되는 대로
We will begin
글로벌 앱
shortly as soon
생태계
as
공정화를
everybody
위한
has
국제 세미나를
been seated.
시작하겠습니다. 자, 마지막으로 휴대전화 한번 체크해 주시고요.
One last
마스크는
time,
상시
please check
착용
your cell
다시 한번
phones
부탁드리겠습니다.
and please remember to wear your masks at all times.
네, 그럼 지금부터 조승래 의원실
We will now
미국 앱
begin
공정성
the Global
연대
Conference for
인터넷
Mobile
기업협회가
Application
공동 주최하는
Ecosystem
글로벌
Fairness,
앱 생태계
co-hosted
공정화를
by
위한
the
국제
Office of the
세미나를
National Assembly
시작하겠습니다.
Member Cho Seung-rae,
저는
the
오늘
CAF,
토론회
and K
섭외를 맡은
Internet.
아나운서
My
김형기입니다.
name is
먼저
Kim Hyung-gi,
인사드리겠습니다.
the announcer and MC for today's event.
네, 오늘 귀한 자리에 사회를 맡아서
It's an honor for
개인적으로
me
또
to be
영광으로
able
생각합니다.
to be
본
the MC
행사는
of this
방역 당국의
event.
사회적 거리두기 지침과 국회 방역
And we
매뉴얼을
are
준수하며
abiding by
진행되고
the
있음을
social distancing
알려드립니다.
measures of the government and of the
더불어서
National
오늘
Assembly
행사는
for
유튜브를
today's
통해서
event.
우리말, 영어,
Moreover, today's
프랑스어로
event
전
is
세계에
also being streamed
생중계되고
live
있다는
worldwide
점도
in
다시
Korean,
한번 함께
English,
전해드립니다.
and French.
자, 그럼 먼저 토론회를 주최하신
First, we will be hearing the opening address from the National Assembly member Cho Seung-rae.
큰 박수와
Please
환영
welcome him with a round of
큰 박수
applause.
주십시오.
예, 반갑습니다. 대한민국
Good to see you all. I'm Cho Seung-lim, member of the National Assembly.
잘 활용하고 계시나 모르겠네요.
I hope you're all using your receivers to listen to the interpretation. Are you all ready?
이렇게 동그라미
If you're ready,
그려주세요.
please draw a circle above your heads.
오늘은 좀 발언자들이 많아서 별도의
We have a lot of speakers today, so I will not introduce everyone.
대신에
We don't have enough time for that. However,
의원님이 참석해 주셨는데
we have the National Assembly member Yang Jong-suk with us. Please give her a round of applause.
양정숙 의원은
Ms. Yang
전기통신사업법, 일명 이제 구글 갑질 방지법, 인앱 결제 방지법을 같이 발의해 주셨습니다.
is one of the team members with me who worked on the amendment of the Telecom Business Act for the In-App Payment Prevention Act.
무소속 의원으로.
She does not currently belong to any party.
국내와 세계 각국에서 찾아주신 기빈들과
I'd like to welcome the distinguished guests and staff members who are visiting our country from around the world, as well as our participants joining us online. As you know, on August 31st, we passed for the first time the amendment of the Telecom Business Act. In other words, the In-App Payment Prevention Act. And this was based on the proposals of 7 National Assembly members, including myself. And the key is to prevent forced in-app payment methods and acts of delaying or deleting the registration of apps. We also include fact surveys as well as inspection of the payment method system. This is leading to related legislature in the US, EU, Australia, and other countries. And we are here today to congratulate the small efforts, the small outcomes that we have been able to achieve through solidarity, as well as to set the direction forward. Unless we have innovation in the mobile ecosystem, we will stall, which in turn will lead to the deterioration of our ecosystem. And that is why we need to look into what needs to be done in order to achieve innovations. And it's not just about banning a certain in-app payment method. For this to be sustainable and for this to bring about digital and mobile innovation, there are certain measures that need to be taken, and we need to think of those measures. Innovation needs money and time. But the app market operators, Google and Apple, are monopolizing that time and money. So there is no room for innovation. Users and developers around the world are demanding one thing, and one thing only, and that is to give them the opportunity to share that time and money for innovation. And only then can we continue to be innovative. A long while ago, Microsoft dominated the market through Windows. And then it came up with the Internet Explorer. And it used this monopoly to run its business until it was faced with restrictions in the US. And since then, we have seen the advent of various internet browsers, which has allowed the competition and innovation that we see today. Likewise, for there to be innovation in the app market, content developers and users need to be given more power. In that sense, I think it is clear what path we should take forward. Of course, Google and Apple created a new value, which is the app market, and for that we should give them respect.
이제는
However,
그 역할도 재조정되고 그 역할도 훨씬 더 업그레이드를 시켜달라는
we
것이
need to
모든
upgrade
개발자들의
that
공통된
role
것입니다.
and highlight that
그건 바로
role.
혁신입니다.
And
지속
for
가능한
this,
혁신을 위해서
we need to undergo
개발자들,
innovation.
콘텐츠
Developers,
이용자들이
content developers,
참여해서 만들어낼
and
수 있는
content
혁신
users
생태계를
need
구성하자.
to be able to take
그게
part
바로
in this
공통된
innovative
것입니다. 오늘은
ecosystem.
바로 그 자리를 확인하는
And
뜻깊은 시간이 될 것이라고
I believe
믿습니다.
that
우리가
today's
단순하게
session will be a
결제
step
방식에
towards
대해서만
that goal.
금지하는 것을 떠나서
So it's not
이
just
모바일 웹
about
생태계가 지속 가능한
preventing
혁신 세계에서
a certain in-app
국제적인
payment.
노력을
It's
저희가
about
해야 될 것이라고 생각합니다.
engaging in international collaboration
많은 분들
to
참여해
revamp
주셔서
this
감사드리고요.
entire ecosystem.
자, 글로벌
Thank
웹
you once
생태계
again.
공정화를 위한
And
국제
with this, I would
세미나를
like to
지금부터 시작하겠습니다.
start the
감사합니다.
global conference for mobile application ecosystem. Thank you.
네, 지속 가능한 혁신 생태계 구현을 위한 오늘 토론회 조승래 의원님의
Thank you very
개회
much
선언이 있었습니다.
for the
다음
opening
순서로 오늘
remarks.
토론회 함께
Next,
주최하신 앱 공정성 연대
we have
메간
from the
김우지호
CAF, which is
사무총장의
co-hosting
개회사가
this
있겠습니다.
event,
이 앱
the
공정성
executive
연대는
director,
미국의
Megan
앱 개발
Demusio,
업체들이 모여서
will be
결성한
giving her
국가적
opening address. The
비영리 단체인데요.
CAF is a
선택의 자유와
non-profit
공정한 경쟁 등
organization
건전한
made
앱
of
생태계를
app
만들기 위해
developers,
활동하고 있습니다.
and it
국제
is
공조와 연대
working
강화를
hard
위해서
for
멀리서 와주신 우리
free competition
메간
as
김우지호
well as the freedom
사무총장님을
of
여러분의 큰
choice
박수로
in the app
모시겠습니다.
ecosystem. Please welcome her with a round of
네, 나와주세요.
applause.
Speaker Park, Chairman Lee, Vice Chairman Kim, Secretary O, members of the National Assembly, distinguished guests, and all those attending here in Korea, as well as those who are watching worldwide. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on these important topics at this pivotal moment that will determine the future of the digital economy. It is fitting that we are gathered here in Seoul, where the first law passed to hold Apple and Google accountable for their anti-competitive App Store practices. On behalf of the Coalition for App Fairness and our more than 60 members, both large and small and from across the globe, thank you. Thank you for showing governments worldwide that legislative solutions can be found to open competition, spur innovation, and benefit consumers. Thank you for your resolve to hold accountable bad actors in the economy, no matter how large and powerful. On a personal note, thank you for your hospitality and kindness. Growing up in Seattle, it is safe to say I never imagined that I would have this incredible opportunity that I do today. And finally, congratulations on once again demonstrating Korea's reputation as a haven for technology, forward-thinking ideas, and fair markets. While Korea was the first nation to pass a law targeting competition in the app ecosystem, it will not be the last. It is an honor to be here, and I look forward to the discussions we will have today. Thank you very much.
네, 멀리서 찾아와 주신 메간 김우지호 사무총장님이었습니다.
Thank you,
이번에는
Executive
오늘
Director
행사의
Megan
개최를
Demusio,
반겨주신
for your
귀빈
remarks.
귀빈 여러분의 축사를 좀 소개를 해드릴까 하는데요. 먼저 박병석 국회의장님께서 바쁘신 일정상 현장을 찾지 못하는 아쉬움과 또
We would like to watch a video message
함께
delivered
청하겠습니다.
by the Speaker of the National Assembly, Byung-seok Park. Please, let's watch it together.
국회의장 박병석입니다. 글로벌 앱 생태계 공정화를 위한 국제 세미나 개최를 축하드립니다. 전기통신사업법 개정안, 이른바 세계 최초의 인앱 결제 강제금융법 통과를 주도하신 조승래 의원께서 오늘 세미나를 준비해 주셨습니다. 수고 많으셨습니다. 행사를 함께 주최한 미국 앱 공정성 연대와 한국 인터넷 기업 협회에도 인사드립니다. 세계 곳곳에서 구글, 애플 등 빅테크 기업의 독과점에 대한 규제가 논의됐지만 이를 제대로 만든 곳은 대한민국이
Korea
처음입니다.
is the first country that put
그런
into this
대한민국에서
legislation.
인앱 결제 강제 정책에 대한 각국의 의견을
And
나누게 됩니다.
today we will share
글로벌
opinions
플랫폼
about this
기업들이
in-app billing
자사
systems.
앱 마켓 안에서
Global
거래하는
platform
디지털
companies
콘텐츠 사업자에게
are
높은 수수료를 강제하고 있습니다.
forcing
인앱
app
결제에 대한 규제
developers
요구가 높아지는
to pay
이유입니다.
for their and use
오늘
their
행사는
in-app billing
인앱 결제
system.
규제를 위한
So for
국제
today's
연대의 첫 발을
conference will
내딛는
be a
뜻깊은
first
날입니다.
stepping stone to this mobile application
프랑스의
ecosystem
세드코
fairness.
디지털 장관께서 직접 방문해 주셨습니다.
The French
미국의
minister
팀
is
스위니
also here with
에픽게임스
us, and also
대표님과
we have Mr. Tim Sweeney,
메간
the CEO of
김우지호
Epic Games,
CF
and also
사무총장님, 마크
we have
북의 CF 창립 임원님께도 감사드립니다.
Megan, the music
모바일
executive director of
생태계는 더
CAF, and Mr.
공정하고
Mark Busey,
더
founding member of
자유스러워야 합니다.
CFA. The mobile
그래야
ecosystem should be more fair
스타트업
and
기업들도
freer.
공정하고
So
자유로운
only
환경
by
속에서
doing that, startup
빅테크 기업으로
companies
성장할
can
수
grow
있습니다.
into big tech companies in a
오늘
more
함께
fair
하신
and
여러분들이
free
지혜를
environment.
모아주실 것으로
I
기대합니다.
hope that all the
축하드리고
participants today can
감사합니다.
gather wisdom. Thank you.
네, 박병석 국회의장님의 또 뜻깊은 축전 함께
So
만나봤습니다.
thank you for the video message.
이어서 오늘 토론회를 축하하기 위해서 직접
Today, to congratulate the opening of today's conference, many National Assembly members are here.
정책을 맡고 계신 분이죠.
So let me invite Chairman Won-wook Lee of the Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee of the National Assembly of Korea, whose responsibility is most relevant to today's agenda. Please welcome him with a big hand.
안녕하세요. 소개받은 이현욱입니다.
Hello, my name is Won-wook Lee.
통역기인가? 통역기.
So I figure that there is signal interference for channel 4. So I hear both English and French. So please take care of that.
한국에서 한 10여 년 정도쯤으로 기억이 되는데요.
I believe it was about 10 years ago. There was this book published by the US professor Michael Sandler. He actually visited Korea at the time. The book is not a easy content, so many people in Korea bought the book. But some people said that not many people will understand the content. But organizers at the time expected that there will be actually maybe a few hundreds people, but the turnout was over 3,000. So many Korean people must have been surprised at the time by the outcome of the event, and that clearly showed that Korean people are very interested in what justice is. Justice, in other words, can be said as fairness. When we think about the history of mankind, I think it's been our shout to achieve and efforts to achieve fairness and justice. It's been that journey. And this is also the case for the modern era. So the US trust law is another example of humankind to create another history of fairness and justice. As lawmaker Cho just mentioned, Google and Apple were the symbols of innovation and never imagined that they could be seen as the symbol of antitrust or unfairness. But now it's time for us to think about what should be our way forward. And there are many movements in that regard throughout the world. So we in Korea had many discussions to think about how to create fair mobile application ecosystem. So I myself met with Google to talk about this as well. But
최종적으로는
the
법을
discussion
통해서
hasn't
문제가
been
있을
so
수뿐이-
continuous.
있을 수뿐이 없는 상황이구나라고 하는 거에 대해
So when we see this
국회에서는
situation as something inevitable, we thought that we need to reach a consensus at the National Assembly of Korea, and that's why we pushed forward with this legislation. There were some concerns about the enactment, because we also thought that maybe we should leave it up to the market rather than enacting a bill at the National Assembly.
많은 노력들을 했음에도 불구하고
Even though we made a lot of efforts
결국에 이제 법으로 만들어졌는데 세계 최초로요.
to make it work in the market, it didn't seem to work that well. That's why we decided to
정부와 국회의 몸부림이었다.
go with this legislation, new legislation. So please see this legislation as our hard efforts.
노력해 주신 분이 이 조승래
And one of the
국회의원
people who actually was deeply involved and led the initiative was the lawmaker Seung-rae Cho and also lawmaker Jung-suk Yang.
마지막에 이것을 여야 합의로
So this
처리가
enactment,
제대로 되지 못하고 있을 때
when this enactment was not passing based on the consensus from the ruling party and the opposition party,
여러 가지 이제 국회에서의 절차들을 진행했을 뿐이고요. 이 자리가
it was possible for us to continue with the process thanks to the support of many members at the National Assembly.
앱 공정성
So,
위한 법을 통과를 시킨 거에
This new legislation
확산시키고 논의를
needs to continue to further expand, and so that we can also have more discussions throughout the society and in the world.
1910년대 미국이
In the 1910,
안티트러스트법을 만들고
the antitrust law was passed in the U.S., and this
법을 만드는
led to the worldwide movement in this regard. So the U.S. trust law was a trigger. I also hope that our new legislation can work as that kind of trigger
바라겠습니다. 아마도
in our efforts toward a mobile application ecosystem fairness.
굉장히 많이
We have many journalists present here today,
관련
and I also see many people participating from the relevant industries.
우리 인터넷 이른바 4차 산업혁명 시기에 새로운
So in this era of the fourth industrial revolution,
역사적으로 기념
I believe that this is a very
기억될 수도 있죠.
important gathering where we can start a new history toward a fair mobile application ecosystem.
여기까지 이렇게 함께 할 수 있었는지
It's actually amazing to see
이렇게 이런저런
the minister, Cedric O, all the way from France, and many other participants from abroad. I know that the secretary has a lot of attention and interest and love for Korea. So Korea is your hometown, as I understand, but thank you very much for making your visit to Korea, and I hope that you will have continued prosperity, and I wish all the participants continued health and happiness. Thank you.
이원욱 위원장님의
So thank you, lawmaker Won-wook Lee, for your remarks. So I'd like to give some announcement. Korean, you can listen to Korean from channel 1 and English channel 2 and French channel 3. So let us know if you experience any difficulties and problems in listening to our interpretation service.
공정한 앱 생태계 조성에 대한
So
노력과
now
경험을 또 보러 와주신 멀리
let me
프랑스에서
invite
찾아주신
Honorable Secretary Cedric O of State for Digital of France, who's traveled far to witness in person Korea's efforts.
Monsieur le Président, Mr.
Honorable Speaker, I first want to thank you very much for having the opportunity to talk in the Korean National Assembly today. As the former speaker pointed it out, it's always a special moment for me with my father being Korean, to have the opportunity to speak at the Korean National Assembly. Well, getting back to today's issue, obviously Korea has been a pioneer and instrumental in that domain, which I think is one of the main challenges that our economies, our Western economies, will be facing in the coming years. Basically, the regulation of big techs. This is, by sense, a transborder question. Korea has been the first country to introduce new rules, but as you know, France will be heading the presidency of the European Union in the first semester 2022, and there are also ongoing discussions, both at the theoretical level with books from Tim Wu, from Lina Khan, who's at the FTC now, in the US, and this is a question that our economies and our democracies will be facing in the coming months. I noticed, by the way, that Korea and Europe are using the same terms to qualify the issue that is raised by big platforms, structuring platforms or gatekeepers, which I think embody quite well the problem that we are facing. We had the opportunity to discuss a few minutes earlier with Tim Sweeney on the current legal procedures that are unfolding in the US on platform regulation. And the assessment that we are having in that traditional competition laws, referring to the Sherman Act, for instance, are not enough. And the competition antitrust laws that we've been designing in the US, in Europe, in Korea, are not enough because they are not able to catch the specific problems that are raised by the new big techs and the gatekeeping services they are offering. This is why we want to tackle that issue in Europe in the coming months. As Congressman Cho Sung-rae just pointed out, and I really want to thank him and also Megan DiMusio, but also the K-Internet for organizing that conference. App fairness and app payment is not the end of the story. The problem that we have to be able to tackle is the ways those services are shaping our economies and the footprint, the economic footprint, but also the democratic footprints as those companies have on our economies and our societies. This is an economic question. Macroeconomic studies have always been showing the fact that too much concentration is bad for the economy, but this is also a democratic question. The question that we have to be able to answer to is the power that private companies that does not have general interest in their, I would say, in the business, in their core business, have taken on our economies and our democracies. And in Europe, we've been facing democratic issues, tackling the issue of contact tracing app, when government has to face the fact that private companies could block their access to app stores in a domain, the public healthcare, which was supposed to be in the core business of government. So I do want to thank again the Korean National Assembly, the K-Internet, and the Coalition for App Fairness to have the opportunity to tackle those issues today. And let's make today only the beginning of the discussion. Thank you very much.
세드릭 오 디지털부 장관님
So thank you,
발언해 주셨습니다.
Minister Cedric O, for your remarks, and thank you for coming all the way to Korea. So what you
그런 것 같습니다.
mentioned is related to not just the industry, but in other corners of our society. So next, we have Hyun Kim, Vice Chairman of the Korea Communications Commission, who is playing a crucial role in reorganizing the legal and regulatory structures after the amendment passed.
방송통신위원회 부위원장 김현입니다.
Hello, my name is Hyun Kim, Vice Chair of the Korea Communications Commission of Korea. So the whole world, not just Korea, is paying attention to our conference today. So first, let me express my gratitude to lawmaker Seung-rae Cho and Mr. Sung-ho Park, president of K-Internet, and Ms. Megan DiMuzio, executive director of the CFA, for their efforts. And I would also like to thank you, Honorable Cedric O, for your remark. So in Korea, Korea passed a new legislation that stipulates the roles of app market operators. This legislation was able to be passed thanks to the support from many lawmakers at the National Assembly. So this is to protect the interests and rights of users and app developers. The KCC will do our utmost to bring about tangible changes for the mobile ecosystem members. To this end, the KCC will first establish and implement subordinate statutes thoroughly so that app market business operators cannot avoid acting upon the regulations. In addition, the KCC will address relevant issues through dialogues to avoid any delay in implementation and will act firmly if they fail to show their will for implementation. Once the new system settles and succeeds in promoting competition among app market operators, app developers, and payment service providers, I believe this will lead to enhanced interest of all stakeholders, including both users and creators. I believe this is the first step towards creating a fair ecosystem, including the platform market. Building an inclusive, innovative, and creative platform ecosystem requires support and participation from not only the government, but also from every stakeholder, including platform operators, content creators, and users. I know that similar acts have been proposed in Europe and the US, which shows that there are many movements and efforts dedicated to creating a fair and sound platform ecosystem. I truly hope that our coalition beyond the borders will serve as a foundation for another productive outcome, because we all need to join hands in creating this change. I wish all of you continued happiness and health. I hope that you can also enjoy the beautiful season of fall while you are staying in Korea. Thank you very much.
방송통신위원회 김현 부위원장님이셨습니다.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, for your
국내 인터넷
remarks.
관련 기업들의 목소리를 모아서 오늘 행사를 또 함께 준비해 주신 한국인터넷기업협회 박성호
Now,
회장님
I'd like to introduce the co-host of today's conference who helped consolidate the voices of Korea's internet-related companies. Let me welcome Mr. Sang-ho Park, President of Korea Internet Corporations Association.
안녕하십니까. 한국인터넷기업협회장 박성호입니다.
Hello, my name is Sang-ho Park, President of K-Internet, Korea Internet Corporations Association. So, I think many speakers have spoken freely, but I have my script ready. So please understand if I sound a little bit stiff. First of all, it's my great pleasure to co-host this global conference, Mobile App Ecosystem Fairness, together with lawmaker Seung-rae Cho and the Coalition for App Fairness of the U.S. In addition, let me also thank Honorable Byung-seok Park, Speaker of the National Assembly of Korea, Won-wook Lee, Chair of the Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee of the National Assembly, and Vice Chairman Hyun Kim of the KCC. Today, we have participants who have traveled a long way across the Pacific and the Atlantic for the globalization of the Anti-Internet Building Coercion Act, despite the global pandemic. So let me thank Mr. Mark Busey, founding member of the KAF, Executive Director Megan DiMuzio of the CAF, and Mr. Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games. And we also have Honorable Cedric O, Secretary of State for Digital of France. So thank you all for your passion and dedication. As you may well know, the new legislation that bars forcing certain internet building systems passed at the National Assembly of Korea on August 31st this year. I believe this was possible thanks to the support from the National Assembly and also the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, the CAF,
이런 조승래 의원님의
as well as the Korean domestic developers and creator groups.
이 일은 결코 성공할 수
I believe that we wouldn't have achieved the result without the strong drive and perseverance of the lawmaker Seung-rae Jo,
지난해 7월에 구글이 인앱
who is the
결제
executive secretary of the
발표한 이후에
Science, ICT, Broadcasting, and Communications Committee.
모든 창작자와
I now
개발자
can
그리고
recall many
모바일
moments
앱을
that have
이용하는
led to
대한민국의
today.
수많은 이용자들을
In July this year, when Google announced its policy,
생태계에
the
어떤
K
영향을
Internet
줄지
decided that we
많은
needed to
고민을
act
했습니다.
on behalf of all the creators, developers, and mobile app users.
이 인류의 경제가 도약적으로 발전한 데는
I think the
봉건주의
history
시대의
of mankind was able to make a great leap forward because many limitations and restraints toward
그런데 마치 전
people
세계
were lifted.
앱 시장을 석권하고 있는
However, the current dominant app market players
봉건시대 영주처럼
tend
전
to
세계 룰을 혼자 정하고 많은 사람들이
control the market by wanting to create their own rules.
그
So
정책이
against
더욱
this
강화된다면
backdrop, if this situation continues to strengthen, I believe our history
많은 관계자들과 이야기를
will
하고
only deteriorate.
옆에서는
So I listened to many stakeholders in the industry and I also talked to many journalists. So we at the K Internet try to let people know and be aware about this issue. And I also explained this issue a lot to the lawmakers in Korea and to the lawmakers in the US. As a result, we were able to receive great responses, not only from the Korean National Assembly, but also from the US Senate and the House of Representatives. Recently, Korean drama Squid Game made a big hit. If
거기서 나오는 이익의 대부분을
you recall, you will remember that in the drama, only the rules were created by a certain group of people, but
이번 인앱 결제
the rulemaking process was not shared with any other participants of the game. So I believe that we need to all participate in creating rules. We need to share our ideas and share the great outcome together. So I hope that we can create a fair and more sound mobile application ecosystem. Korea's legislation will be only a beginning. I hope that this effort will lead to creating more icons of innovation throughout the world. This will lead to fair mobile application ecosystem. We at K Internet will also do our utmost in this regard. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and I wish all of you continued health and happiness.
한국인터넷기업협회 박성호 회장님의 말씀.
So thank you, President Park, for
오늘
your
이 토론의
remarks.
주제인 앱 생태계 공정성과 상생의 문제.
So
인도에서도
for
활발하게
this
논의가 되고 있는데요. 이 논의를 주도하고
theme
계신
is
인도의
very much discussed in India as well. So let me invite
만나봅니다.
the video message from Mr. Shijo Krivola, Executive Director of ADIF.
Sijo Kurvala George, the Executive Director of ADIF, on behalf of the organization and the entire Indian startup fraternity, applaud the pioneering leadership of South Korean lawmakers in the passing of the amendments to the Telecommunications Business Act, otherwise known as the IAP Bill. Mahatma Gandhi once famously said, "I understand democracy as something that gives the weak the same chance as the strong." It is this democratic principle that was upheld by South Korea with the passing of the bill. The bill is also a major step globally towards ensuring a level playing field in the digital economy. Unfair markets and anti-competitive practices stifle innovation and negatively impact market outcomes. Proactive and progressive legislation nurtures and nourishes healthy, innovative, and competitive ecosystems. With the legislation, South Korea has led the way and set a precedent for other nations to adopt and build on. The app economy challenges in India remain similar. The government has also taken note. Investigations are ongoing by the Competition Commission of India on petitions filed by ADIF and other Indian developers. ADIF is also working with the Indian government to enact legislation on the lines of the South Korean one. We iterate our continued support to South Korean leadership in their pursuit for fairer markets in the digital economy. We also exhort the Apples and the Googles of the world to uphold the spirit of the legislation and adopt fairer business practices going forward. Thank you.
So we will start a discussion session soon, but before that, we will now have a commemorative photo session. So please come up to the podium for the photo session. So please come up on the podium. We will have a commemorative photo session, and then we will shortly start a discussion session. So for the discussion panelists, please don't come off of the podium after the photo session and take your seats on the podium.
글로벌 앱 생태계 공정화를 위한 국제
So
세미나.
the global conference for mobile application
전 세계적인
ecosystem
화두이기도
fairness.
하고
It's a
많은
global
영상 시전들을 보면서 오늘
topic.
생산적인
And
토론회가 되기를
Listening to
기원합니다.
video messages from around the world make us aware that this is a very important topic, and I hope that today's conference will bear fruitful results.
네, 이제 본 토론이 시작될 예정입니다.
So we will
토론자께서는
start a discussion
주시고요.
session. So
예.
the panelists, please
토론자분들이
take your seats
자리를
on the
정돈해
podium.
주시는 동안 오늘 좌장을 맡으실 조승래 의원님 간단하게 소개해 올리겠습니다. 조승래
While we
의원님은
wait, let me introduce Mr. Cho Seung-le. He is the National Assembly member representing Yuseong District of Daejeon.
활발하게 활동하시면서
He is the Executive Secretary
IT,
of the
방송,
Science,
콘텐츠
ICT,
등 산업의
Broadcasting
성장과
and
발전을 위해서
Communications
힘써 오셨습니다.
Committee, and
오늘도
he is working hard
우리
to develop
청작자와
the
소비자 그리고 플랫폼이
IT,
상생할 수
broadcasting,
있는
and content-related
앱 생태계 구성을 위해서
industries.
이번
And he has
토론회를
prepared today's
준비해 주셨습니다.
discussion so that we may discuss ways for creators, consumers, and the platform to coexist in a new app ecosystem.
청취에 불편함이
Before we
청취에
begin, if
불편함이
there is
있으신 분들은
anybody
손
who is
들어주시고요.
having difficulties with their receivers,
조치해드리겠습니다.
please let the staff
자, 이상
know and we
없으시면
will attend to you.
오늘 토론회 준비한 내용이 많은 관계로 바로
Now we will go right ahead
조승래
into the
의원님께
discussion. I will pass the mic over to Mr. Cho Seung-le.
예, 오늘 토론회의 자장을 맡은
So hello, my name is Seung-le Cho,
오늘
National Assembly member and the chair of this panel discussion. We have many participants participating in this conference, so we had a long list of speakers who gave us welcome remarks. So we'd like to proceed
아까
rather
이상환 의원도
fast.
있었습니다만 이번에
So for
인해 결제
today's
강제 금지법
conference
통과의 의미, 향후에
is
우리에게
about
주어진
the
과제는 무엇인지,
implication and the meaning of the passing of the recent enactment in Korea and current
움직임이 있는지,
movements in other countries around the world, such as Europe and the US, and what changes this new legislation will bring to app developers and users and consumers. So today's discussion will be about the prospects
자, 그럼 먼저
of
오늘 여기 현장에 계신
this
분들의 토론을
legislation.
듣기 전에
So before
같이
we
참석을 하기로
hear
돼
from the
있었지만
panelists
참석하지
today,
못하신 미국
we'd
상원의
first like
마샤
to
블랙번
hear,
의원께서
watch a
영상으로
video message
의견을 좀
from U.S.
보내주셨습니다.
Senator Ms.
미국에서
Marsha Blackburn,
상생의 앱
who
생태계
wished to
조성을
be here
위해서
today
법안을
with
주도하고
us but
계신
couldn't due to
블랙번
other
의원님의
commitments. So
의견을
let's
먼저
hear from the
들으면서
Senator
시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Blackburn, who is
네,
leading
영상
the
보여주세요.
efforts in the
I'm
U.S.
United States Senator Marsha Blackburn, and I am pleased to join you virtually, even though I would like to be there with you so that we could celebrate the progress that we have made over the last few years. And we've walked together to find ways to loosen Silicon Valley's grip, not only on technology users, but on the small companies and the startups where big ideas are born. And now, as you all well know, the next big issue we have to tackle is the battle against coercive app store practices. As I was preparing to speak to you today, I took a look at some news articles about what's happening right now in Korea with Apple, and I will tell you, the way Apple has ignored Korea's new law tells you all you need to know about how this is going to play out in other countries. We have a responsibility to set a new standard on behalf of creators and innovators and small businesses. We have that responsibility that will protect competition and will strengthen consumer protections within the app market. It's not going to be easy, but the good news is that this issue is uniting policymakers and advocates across political lines and around the globe. Here in the U.S., I've teamed up with my colleague, Senator Richard Blumenthal and Senator Amy Klobuchar to sponsor the Open App Markets Act, which would establish clear and enforceable rules for app store owners and content creators to follow. Big tech companies see this as an attack on their bottom line, but in reality, it is their anti-competitive behavior that is the attack on innovation and progress. That is an attack we intend to stop. Right now, policymakers and advocates have a choice to make. Will they allow this behavior to continue, or will they fight for a free and fair marketplace? I know where I stand, and I am so grateful to have you standing with me. I want to thank you for all you have done, your leadership that you have brought to bear, and thank you for joining me in this fight to keep a free and fair marketplace.
예, 블랙번 의원의 말씀을 들었습니다. 미국에서도
So we just
오픈 앱마켓
listened to a video message from U.S. Senator
준비하고 있다는 말씀.
Marsha Blackburn. She's leading the efforts in the U.S. to enact a bill for creating an inclusive app ecosystem. She mentioned that there is need for us to create new standards,
어떻게 노력해야 될 것인지에 대해서
and also
본인을 위해서 하고 있다는 말씀을
mentioned what kind of efforts we need to make going forward around the world. So now, let me invite the Honorable Mr. Cedric O, Secretary of State for Digital of France, for his remarks. So he gave us a welcome remarks, but we'd like to listen more from him.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there is basically a huge need for tech regulation as a whole. And this skepticism that we see, especially in Europe and in the US, but I think this is a more broader question among our citizens on technology might also come out of the way the digital ecosystem is functioning. So this is why I mentioned in my previous speech that I do think that we need regulation from an economic but also from a democratic point of view. This is true in Europe, this is true in US, in the US, this is true in Korea. In Korea, you have many players in the digital economy. I mean, you have Daum, you have Naver, you have Kakao, and so on and so on. But nevertheless, you felt the need to introduce new regulation. Imagine the situation in Europe and the US where basically you have only one search engine, Google, only one social network, Facebook, only one marketplace, this is especially true in US but also in part of Europe, only one map application, which is Google, and so on and so on. So those platforms, the need for regulation, economic regulation, is highly needed in Korea, but it is even more the case in Europe and in the US. Basically what we have to do, I think, is what the US did in the latest 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. They had infrastructures which were owned by only small number of players. The question that we have to answer today is digital infrastructures. We could not be thinking of like bridges, airports, streets where private players would have the power to allow who's going to ride on those streets, who's going to, and what are the priorities, what are the fees, and so on and so on. So we need to take public power at the right place, which is regulating the infrastructures that are making our day-to-day life. So this is why we have been introducing new regulation in Europe. And France, it will be, as I mentioned, the priorities of the French presidency in the coming semester. We hope that TSA and DMA, so Digital Services Act, is about content regulation, Digital Market Act is about economic regulation and antitrust, but there are a lot of echoes between those two regulations. We hope that they will be adopted at the end of the month at the council level. And if we're a little bit optimistic, let's hope that we could adopt them at trialogue, I mean, at the European level before the end of the French presidency. A few examples of what the DMA is doing. It will, so it's shaping the concept that you're using here in Korea of gatekeepers. It's revolving around that concept. It will ban in advance business behaviors that are harmful to innovation. We mentioned, for instance, self-preferencing practices by Google, and we saw what happened with the Google shopping issue with the commission. And also, another example, which is the prohibition of forcing app developers to use specific payment provider in the app, which is in the core of what we are talking today. There will be also lever given to the regulator in order to correct the way the market are functioning if it thinks that I would say the way the gatekeeping services shape the market are too problematic, like introducing interoperability and price regulation into those services. What we have to do, I think, is not to break them up. I mean, breaking them up might have been the solution of the 20th century. But due to the way those markets are functioning, breaking them up might not be a solution, even though we should not completely let that aside. What we need to do, and I want to refer to Tom Wheeler, who is the former head of the Federal Communication Commission, is to break them open. We need more competition and more freedom within the internet space. Two things that I want to mention before in my conclusion. The first one is that, and this is a part of the European debate, we need flexibility in our regulation. The part of the problems that are raised by those platforms, we don't know them yet. And the problem is that we take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to take regulation to tackle the issue of yesterday and of today. And what we have to be able to design is a regulation that can adapt to the incoming problems that we will be facing, because the regulator is too slow compared to the way and the pace digital market are functioning. Second thing is, and this is one of the reasons of my presence today, is that this is a trans-border issue. And there are a lot of discussion between the US and Europe. I will be in the US beginning of January. I might meet with Lina Khan from the FTC. And there are obviously a lot of debates that are trans-border, and we need to strengthen the discussion, obviously between the US and Europe, but also with Korea, which has been so far the pioneering country in terms of app fairness regulation. And thank you very much.
예, 감사합니다. 세드리고 장관께서는
Thank you very much,
프랑스
Secretary
디지털 서비스
O.
법안이 준비되고
He
있고,
talked about how the legislations that they are preparing for and how he hopes that the legislation will be passed. And two things, he talked about the flexibility of the regulations.
시점을 좀 맞춘 규제 설계가 필요하다.
So we need to design regulations that are focused on the future. The second thing is, this is also the purpose of the seminar, so we need more coordination between countries in the future. So thank you very much. Next, we have from the Coalition for Fairness, Executive Director Megan DiMusio, and she will be talking about issues facing developers of all sizes and the harm of Apple and Google policy on consumers.
Thank you again for inviting the Coalition for App Fairness to participate in today's discussion. And as a co-host of this event, for your leadership in passing the world's first law aimed at restoring competition and choice in the app marketplace. We are honored to join Epic Games and Mash Group, two of our largest members in today's discussion. We are deeply grateful that such well-known and respected companies are able to take a stand and fight for the rights of all developers. But just because they are among the most recognized members does not mean that they are the most important or that their stories are any more significant than those who are struggling to bring their innovations to the app market, create jobs, and improve the quality of life because of the anti-competitive practices of Google and Apple. In fact, it is precisely those companies that cannot afford to take on the world's most powerful tech giants that demonstrate the need for change in the App Store. All companies should be able to compete fairly. And no company should ever be so dominant in a market that it can set the rules of competition and even decide who can compete. As Executive Director of the Coalition for App Fairness, I talk to these companies day in and day out. I also talk to those who don't even compete in the app marketplace because it is simply too daunting to comply with the diktats of app gatekeepers. These companies are, of course, hurt, but consumers are also losing. When a new product does not go to market or is undermined in the marketplace, we are deprived of new technology that can make our lives better, make business more productive and efficient, and could even improve our health and well-being. And don't forget that as consumers, we are the ones who pay the outrageously high app tax applied to most digital goods and services. Legislators, regulators, and courts around the world are taking notice. But rather than recognize the inevitable change that is coming, the gatekeepers are building new walls to protect their empires. Korea is a prime example. When this body passed its App Store law in September, rather than comply and give this institution the respect it so rightly deserves, Apple and Google are playing games. No one is fooled by Google's laughable excuse for a compliance plan, which substitutes mandatory in-app purchasing fees with mandatory fees on other forms of payment. and Apple's refusal to comply with the new law altogether should be seen for exactly what it is, a slap in the face to the Korean people and their democratically elected leaders. Make no mistake, if these App Store operators are allowed to circumvent the law here, they will use the same playbook across the world. They simply cannot be allowed to ignore the will of the people. But it does not have to be this way. In fact, I have some advice for Apple and Google. Rather than viewing Korea's new law as an obstacle, they should see it as a chance to live up to their stated ideals and principles. Apple has always positioned itself as a champion of consumer rights, creators, and innovators. Google was famously founded with the motto, "Don't be evil." While reality may not have always agreed with those images, Korea's new law gives them the opportunity to change course and to prove they are indeed a force for good. So I say, come to Seoul and comply with this new law. Rather than make excuses and phony arguments, now is the time to take the side of competition and choice. Give developers the right to freely communicate with their customers, to use payment options of their choice, allow users to actually use their devices as they see fit. It's not too late to live up to the stated ideals of consumer benefit and innovation and to make the world a better place. We all know that gatekeepers do not let go of power easily. But we also know that human desire for freedom and progress cannot be diminished. Thankfully, there are efforts across the globe to follow Korea's example and take on this urgent challenge. Now is the time to open the gates and unleash the next great wave of technological progress. Thank you so much.
예, 감사합니다. 메간 디무조 사무총장님 수고하셨습니다.
Thank you, Executive Director, for your remarks.
앱 개발자나
So I
신작자들의
believe this
문제이기도
issue
하지만
comes down to not only app developers and business operators, but also an issue of consumers.
독점적인 이 앱 마켓 사업자들의
These
횡포,
monopolies,
혹은 독점적 기준은
companies of the app market, will not only deter innovation in the market, but also will limit consumers' right to access to services. So this is why we need to have a fair, open, and free mobile application ecosystem. This will benefit consumers as well. So Google and Apple were symbols of innovation, but now things have changed a little bit. Whether they will continue to keep their reputation and image as companies, or will they just stick to their current image and be seen as outdated innovations of the past. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games, for his remarks.
The world of technology was built on competition. Each invention was built upon by many companies around the world, from the transistor to the personal computer and now the smartphone. And now Apple and Google have won the smartphone competition and are using their new monopoly power to tax and prevent competition in the markets for app stores and payment processing. Google and Apple deserve to profit from their work, but they must not be allowed to use their monopoly power to block and tax competition like this. Google is disrespecting Korean law by charging a 26% fee for payments they do not process. Now, it's perfectly normal for a company to charge a fee for a service it provides. But what kind of company can charge a fee for a service it does not provide? Only a monopoly can do that. I think Google is crazy to attempt this approach. Google's fees inflate prices, and they prevent developers from passing along savings to consumers. When we launched Fortnite on Google Play and the App Store with our new payment system, our aim was to pass on savings to consumers by bypassing these 30% platform fees. And both Apple and Google chose to block Fortnite to prevent us from passing on savings to consumers. Apple has chosen a different path than Google. Apple is simply ignoring Korean law. Apple locks 1 billion users into one store and payment processor. Now, Apple complies with oppressive foreign laws which surveil users and deprive them of political rights. But Apple is ignoring laws passed by Korea's democracy. Apple must be stopped. And today we're seeing the beginning of a new medium that's called the metaverse. It's been predicted by science fiction. But the metaverse is a 3D social entertainment platform. A 3D social entertainment platform. Sorry. And some early examples of games that aspire to be the metaverse are Roblox, PUBG, and Fortnite. Now, over the coming decades, the metaverse has the potential to become a multi-trillion-dollar part of the world economy, open to all companies around the world as equals. As equals. Now, Apple and Google policies ban other companies from creating the metaverse so that they can dominate it themselves and tax it. We must not allow these two companies to control our digital lives. Now, Apple and Google policies are so restrictive that if the World Wide Web had been invented after the smartphone, then Apple and Google would have blocked all web browsers from being released on their platforms. The web violates at least 3 Apple and Google policies on competing payment methods, on content not reviewed by Apple and Google, and by many other aspects of the web. Now, Korea has taken a world leadership role in combating operating system monopolies to restore fair competition. If Korea succeeds, then the world of the future will be a free world for technology, and not the captive world that Apple and Google are trying to build. If Korea succeeds, then consumers will have better prices, and software creators will have the opportunity to compete fairly. Your work here is making the metaverse possible. And I'm very proud to stand up against these monopolies with you. And I'm proud to stand with you and say, I'm a Korean. Thank you very much.
예, 감사합니다. 아까 제가
Thank you for your remark. So you mentioned I'm Korean. So that's why I said that we are welcome to have you back.
어떤 플랫폼이 기술
So a
발전을
certain platform could expedite the technological innovation or could limit technological innovation. But the current behaviors of platform providers have reached to a point where they actually limit the further innovation and technological development. So for these companies can make a positive impact on the technological innovation, these platform operators need to change as well and need to comply with this new legislation and the efforts that are currently being made globally. So the Korean government National Assembly made efforts, but we also need solidarity and coalition throughout different stakeholders around the world.
우리 대한민국의
Next up, we have President Seobon-gang from the Korea Webtoon Industry Association. When there was a change in Google's policy, there were several movements in Korea, and he is in the industry that led this movement. So let's hear from him. Good morning, I'm Seobon-gang, President of the Korea Webtoon Industry Association. I would first like to thank Mr. Cho and the K Internet and the international guests for making this event possible. What I would like to touch on today is the changes that the act has brought about to the content ecosystem. So there was a big change, and it was a very meaningful act that was passed in August. So we work with not just creators and developers, but everybody was really happy about this enactment. And it was also the world's first example that restricted specific in-app payment methods. So we were also very proud of this. And since then, I'd like to talk about what has changed and to what degree it has changed. So I did my research, and there was a study by George Washington, and you could save about 770 billion won. People could also hire more than 3,850 people by year. This is the expected outcome, but since it hasn't been that long since we enacted it, these changes haven't happened yet. But I think it's significant in that we were at least able to place some limitations on Google, and we now have the method to allow people to make choices when making in-app payments. Also, it has a positive impact on other countries. I think these are some of the meaningful changes that have taken place, and with this, I think if it continues to bring about change, Google and Apple will be more cautious in their next steps. And what I wanted to share is that we have a good framework in place, but we still need more from Google and Apple. So I would also like to talk about what needs to be done. If you look at ways, there are still ways to circumvent the law, and that needs to be solved. And then about the penalties, I feel that Google and Apple would be willing to pay those penalties instead of abiding by the law. There's a new Google Play service transaction fee that was announced by Google. And if you look at their new announcement, it seems like they're trying to nullify the efforts of our assembly. And this is something that we had concerns about even prior to the enactment. We had concerns, but we were hoping that it wouldn't happen. So in that sense, it is a shame that they actually did choose to go that way. And Google has said that it will allow other payment methods as an option. But as people are forced to use their payment system, this is only for third-party payments. So it's more like an additional payment option. So this should also be improved. And they still charge a surcharge of 26% for these third-party payments. So these fees should also be looked into. And about Google's payment method, the transaction fee is still 30%.
그리고 지금 현재 가장 조금 전에도 말씀드렸지만 1차적으로 해결이 돼야 될 게
Another thing is
구글이 정하는 결제 시스템을 강제하는 부분.
how Google is forcing its in-payment system and how you have to install and keep that app in your device. And even if you use a third party, you have to pay through Google and pay a surcharge of 26%. So those are the first things, as I mentioned, that we need to discuss before anything else. And the business information of Apple should also be disclosed. As such, I hope that we will take this opportunity to ensure that the amendment of the law is really put into practice. And before I came here, I understand that there is an enforcement decree by the Korea Broadcasting Commission, and I think, and I've already submitted my opinion on this, so I hope that this will also be reflected. And I look forward to listening to your ideas on this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Seo. So Google announced a policy to allow free in-app payment, and it put the surcharge at 4%. And the rest, the 26%, is the money for using the in-app market. And I think that's a bit too much, because that's how all market principles are. There's a lot of participants and there's a lot of turnarounds, which means that the cost goes down. But Google or Apple's app market, although they have a lot of participants and although there's a lot of turnarounds, they still propose the same transaction fees, which doesn't make sense. So I think that we should, look more into this, as he mentioned. Another thing that he said is it's all about the details. So we were not able to express everything in the law. So the KCC, the Korean government, came up with a specific enforcement decree, should come up with a decree for content developers. And I think this is where we can make another victory. And to that end, the KCC should listen to the specific examples of our creators here in Korea. Thank you very much.
So now we'd like to invite the last panelist, who I am meeting for the third time this time. So I'd like to invite Mr. Mark Busey, Senior Vice President of Match Group and founding member of the CAF.
Thank you for allowing us to be here and allowing me to participate. It's a great pleasure to see you again, Mr. Vice Chairman. Also very thankful for Mr. Secretary of State and Madam Vice Chair of the KCC for you being here, and all the Assembly members for showing such boldness in acting to stop this monopoly as it exists today. Nobody foresaw this kind of monopoly happening anywhere on the globe, to be frank. And it puts big oil and the previous trust busting to shame. It really does, because it affects every aspect of society. They have become the complete and total gatekeeper, and that's unacceptable. Korea said that's unacceptable. And when we look around the globe now, the US is acting, the EU, France, UK, Japan, Russia, India, Australia, South Africa is now acting and moving on these issues. There's a theme here. That theme is that something must be done. And what is the answer that we're hearing? The answer we hear is we can buy a lot of lobbyists, we can buy a lot of law firms, we have unlimited legal resources, so we'll send an army of lobbyists out to stop freedom, to stop competition. And that's a scary prospect. I admire you, sir, so very much for being here because you really do represent small entrepreneurs who want to express their creativity and bring that forth. But at the same time that the world is dealing with COVID and we're facing economic perils that nobody had foreseen, two companies that control the marketplace are posting record profits. Record profits, never seen in the history of the globe. And I'm not criticizing any company for making profit. That is the free market. Let's embrace that. But there's a point of abuse. And when we see that kind of abuse, we must act. Korea said, we will act. We applaud Korea for what it's done. It was absolutely amazing. And I'll tell you, sir, coming from my perspective in the US, the media, reporters kept calling up and saying, oh, nothing can ever pass. You can't beat them. They're too big to fail. They have too many resources. I've seen what they're doing in Europe, sir, and it's staggering the opposition that they're mounting. But at the end of the day, public officials do what's right. And that's what's happened here. So I don't want to take up any more time. It's been a long day, and I know everybody has other business to get to. But the fact that this conference is occurring, the fact that we are now truly talking about global harmonization of rules to protect consumers and small developers is landmark. And for that, we thank you, consumers thank you, developers thank you, and we look forward to being there as victory succeeds and moves forward.
감사합니다. 마크비즈의 말씀 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you, Mr. Busey, for your remarks. You mentioned that global harmonization is important and there are movements that are happening throughout the world. Now, we've finished the panelist remarks. So, do you have any opinion that you'd like to, or question that you'd like to ask to other panelists?
Would anybody like to add to their remarks? Nobody? Okay. Okay, in that case, of the audience, are there any opinions or questions related to today's talk? We'll maybe take two. If you raise your hand, we will go to you. Okay, the gentleman here. And then you will be the next one.
I have two questions for Epic Games. Number one is, when do you open your new office in Seoul? Number two is, by doing so, you are able to file a lawsuit in South Korea against Apple. Yeah. I wonder your handling of this.
Epic has had an office in Korea for about 12 years now, currently employing 25 people and engineers and business people and growing. We're very happy with the presence we have here and hope to grow it over the coming years. It's a country, it's really a city with an incredibly smart and focused set of engineers and artists moving the game industry forward globally.
예. 다음에 예, 여기 앞에.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sarah McGuire. I'm from the British Embassy, and I think Secretary of State, you're maybe best placed to answer my question. And my question's around multilateral groupings. So, as part of the G7 presidency that the UK held this year, we held talks or discussions on digital competition under our digital track, which I know that you participated in. So, yeah, my question is around what can multilateral groupings like the G7 or the OECD do to kind of help create a free and fair digital markets wider than just the app ecosystem?
이거는 우리 그 세드릭이 답변해 주시기 좋을 것 같은데. 네.
Well, this is obviously a trans-border issue, and multilateral discussions are needed, and you mentioned a few framework in which we've been tackling those issues. I think that, well, the main issue is that this is coherent with the market. I mean, the fact is that the regulation of competition is really coherent with the market in which the competition is unfolding. So I think we have to go step by step. Korea has been introducing a new law. Europe is supposed to introduce them in the coming months, but it's still there are still ongoing negotiations. And then we'll see what happens in the US with a discussion that is also unfolding with, from what I understand, possible bipartisan agreement on that. Well, let's be cautious, but anyway. So having said that, I think that if there is that momentum, this will build the ground for discussion at the multilateral level. But the prerequisite in order to be able to discuss that is that there are law and regulation passed in the different areas.
예, 그거는 저도 좀 답변을 좀 드려보고 싶은데.
So I also like to answer the same question.
지난번에 이제 세계 정상들이 모여서
So world leaders gathered recently to talk about global corporation tax and also about digital tax.
그다음에 추가적으로 지금 또 어떤 논의들이
And additionally, we see some other discussions as well. After free trade agreement, we talk about regional economic blocks. When you talk about the rules or guidelines for trade, now we are discussing that we need to come up with the digital standards as well, and we need to collaborate in this regard. So for this topic, I believe that we will need to come up with a global cooperative framework. And not only the National Assembly, but civic groups will also have to gather together to discuss how we need to come up with international norms for this trade, including digital content trade. So these recent discussions make us believe that there will be more efforts made in that regard. So shall we accept another question before we wrap up the session? I'm from Korea Daily. I have two questions. First, Mr. Tim Sweeney said that you mentioned that monopoly companies can charge for the services they don't even provide. But what Google and Apple say that because this is the fees that they charge consumers for operating their ad market. So what is your opinion on this? And for the Korean government perspective, does the Korean government have some plans of how to control Apple and Google and how to levy their fees in the future?
The key is to recognize that these modern tech platforms consist of many independent services. and goods. There's a hardware market, there's a store market, there's a payments market, and there are many other related markets. And it's critical that antitrust enforcement not allow a monopolist in one market to use their control of that market to impose control on related markets. In the case of Google and Apple, they use their operating system monopoly to impose a monopoly on payments and on stores. And we need to force Google to compete in each market separately and independently without using their power to coerce consumers or developers. So Google should have every right to offer a payment service, but not require it. And Google must not be allowed to impose a tax on payment services from other companies or stores from other companies. And so I think it's a mistake to debate the rate and to say 26% is too high and it should be a lower rate. I think we have to say Google cannot use its control of the Google Play Store to impose a monopoly on in-app payments, which are a different market for purchases made at a different time than apps are obtained from the store. I think the answer to all of those questions about rates has to be zero. Google can compete as a payment processor, but they can't impose fees on anybody who doesn't use their service. And the same for Apple, in my opinion.
예. 그게 이게 아주 이제 기술적인 또 이슈들이 안에 포함돼 있어서 조금
It entails a lot of technical issues.
조금 더 기술적인 설명을 누구한테 좀 들으면 좋을 것 같고요.
So I think it would help if you got some technical information from someone.
대한민국 법이 시행된 이래로
And since the law was introduced, Google and Apple has changed their policies, and of course we're not satisfied with that. And we have the Vice President of the KCC with us. How about you answer for us?
못 들으셨다고요?
You didn't hear the question? Okay.
지금 그 국회에서 지난번에 국정감사를 할 때도 구글과 애플에
So
대해서
when there was
이행
the
계획서를 제출하라고 했고
audit, we
1차
asked
이행
them to
계획서가 불만족스러운
hand in
상황이었고
what
그래서
actions
지금
they would
계속
take,
촉구하고 있는 상태인데
and we're
구글과 애플이
still
계속 이런
asking
식으로
for
나오게
this.
되면
And if they
앞으로
continue with this
방송의 정부에서는
stance,
어떤 조치가 가능한 것이냐 그거에 대한 질문이
the question was, what should we do? Hi, I'm the Vice President of the KCC. And I mentioned this earlier. By March, until March, they have the grace period. So we're sending out warnings about this, and we will be engaged in all sorts of efforts to meet this deadline, and we're working hard so that we can come up with an app payment system that can benefit our people. And we'll try to be as detailed as possible about this. We had discussions about this yesterday, and tomorrow this will also be discussed in the higher committee.
예, 그러면 이제
Okay, so we will end with this. To wrap up, this issue is not just about operators, between operators. This has to do with the users who are part of the ecosystem as well. And from the user's perspective,
그 앱 스토어에 대한 접근권
it's about access to the App Store, the right to enjoy various contents, and to do so in a cost-effective manner. So how are you going to come up with an ecosystem that can make this possible? So we need this perspective on one side. The second thing is the app operator, the user, and the developers. We need a global standard for regulations. So what we were saying earlier on this morning is that this is the first discussion here in Korea, and the next, second, and third discussions will take place in the US, France, the EU, and so on. So we're trying to make this a global endeavor, and the government authorities and National Assembly members will also be called out too. We also need participation of NGOs and other international bodies. So this is a wave that requires the concerted efforts of people from all around the world. So I hope that you will also show us your support. So with this, I'd like to end the Global Conference for Mobile Application Ecosystem Fairness. I especially would like to thank Secretary Cédric O for his participation. Thank you, and see you next time.
활발하게 의견 개진해 주신 우리 토론자분께
Thank
다시
you.
한번
I'd like to thank all the panelists for your active discussions.
네, 이것으로 글로벌 앱 생태계
So
공정화를 위한
this
국제 세미나를
ends
모두
today's
마치도록
seminar
하겠습니다.
on the mobile application
이제 입법이
ecosystem
됐고
fairness.
후속 조치에
The
대한 여러 가지
legislation has
심사점들을 나눌
passed
수
in
있는
Korea,
회의였던 것 같습니다.
and this was
토론을
a great
준비해
venue
주신
for us to
조승래
think about the
의원님과
talk
앱
about
공정성 연대,
implications
한국
of
인터넷
the
기업
passing
관계자
of the recent
여러분과
legislation.
토론자분들 그리고
So I'd like to thank
끝까지
the
관심
organizers
가져주신
and all the
국내외 언론인
participants who
여러분께도
have
감사의
been
말씀을
with us
드립니다.
from home and
돌아가시는 길
abroad.
안전하게 돌아가시기 바랍니다. 더불어서 나가실 때 입구에
So on your way
통역기
out,
반납해
please
주시면
return your
감사하겠습니다.
translation
고맙습니다.
receiver. Thank you.